Hi guys, another great question submitted on the Vet TV comments section. Video number 8, we mentioned a little bit, just barely, used the words metacognition, and a couple of you had written in, Joe in particular had written, I think about my thoughts all the time too. I think about why I'm thinking and feeling a particular way. What does this mean then? So we're going to hit on just a little bit of metacognition. A couple disclaimers. This is so much of the quick and dirty that it is probably a true disservice to metacognition as a whole. And the second is that metacognition is still a very early theory. You and I today are only going to talk about the terminology and what it really means for us in therapy. There is actually a metacognitive therapy that has not been around that long, maybe 15 to 20 years, but that's not what we're discussing. Today is just the terminology. So not knowing Joe personally and not having a whole lot of information, I simply based my answer off of prior experiences with veterans in treatment. So metacognition, again, has a lot of theory, but we're still in the hypothesis phase. The thinking about thinking process is not necessarily the why or even the content of our thoughts anymore. It's the how did we end up thinking that way. So it's much more process driven, in my opinion, than it is content driven. Our daily focus when it comes to metacognition is to evaluate what is in the world and make decisions accordingly. So a good military or veteran example of this would be EOD work. Metacognition is very similar to EOD work or disarming an IED. And I know that sounds crazy, but follow me, okay? And thank you to my EOD techs for helping me through this process. We had actually talked about this a couple weeks ago in session, and so it was a great question and a really good analogy, I thought. So again, a good example is an IED, okay? There are thousands and thousands of ways to disarm an IED. We are no longer worried about the quote-unquote content of the IED as much as we are the process of disarming it, because an IED is an IED. It doesn't really matter what type of battery is in there or charge or the fragmentation that's going to come with it. It's just a whole bunch of bad shit put in one place, okay? So we acknowledge that a bomb is a bomb, okay? Symptoms are symptoms. Trauma is trauma. Our negative thoughts are negative thoughts. So the way that we would disarm an IED is all based on who we are as people. Yes, to a certain extent, we go through a schoolhouse. We have ways to learn. We have checklists. We memorize certain things. And eventually, through trial and error, we learn what works best for us. Therapy is a very similar process. You and I are a two-man IED team. And what I see, you don't always see. And what you see, I don't always see, which is why we are invaluable to one another, okay? So the learning process and the incoming information vary differently based upon team members. There is so much information coming at you when you are working to disarm an IED that you are taking in itsy bitsy pieces of information all at the same time, and then you are putting them together in a thought process, okay, with a solid belief or feeling that we are pretty confident in our decision making. We believe there is a high probability that we are correct in our thought process, okay? But how do we make those decisions? Are they based on information in the environment? Are they based on past experiences? A lot of times with trauma they are. Are they based on an external cue, or are they based on an internal cue? In other words, my blood pressure went up, all of a sudden I have stomach cramps, something does not feel right, quote unquote. Did a signal come from somewhere in my brain that I'm not even consciously aware of? And so the metacognitive term, or the use of the term metacognition, is the way we think about thinking. Again, not necessarily the content of our thoughts, but how did we end up there, okay? The problem for our post-trauma brain, a lot of the times, is that we end up in a couple of different places. We end up overthinking things a lot. Our new belief becomes, if I worry enough, I can prevent bad things from happening. If I'm hyper alert or hyper vigilant enough, I can save others if something bad happens. If I do X, Y, or Z, either one of those, then nothing bad will happen, or I'll be able to handle it when it comes up. But the bottom line is that worrying does not prevent trauma. Worrying and ruminating especially do not prevent bad things from happening to people. It simply, the world just doesn't work that way. But our belief system has shifted from positive metacognition to negative metacognition. And that's where a lot of you live, because you are constantly beating yourself up about a prior event. And since you cannot find a why or a solution to it, we are continuously over and over and over analyzing, and the thought process becomes very distorted. So the question is, how do I get out of that cycle? Really, I'm sure a few of you could get out of this cycle on your own, but boy, it is damn hard. This is why the TwoMan IED team of veteran or active duty member and therapist is invaluable, because you see things that I don't see, and I see things that you don't see, and together we can figure out that process. Kind of like Dante to Virgil, or Yoda to Luke, so to speak, okay? We guide one another, all right? And the information that you provide to me in session, again, is how we drive treatment, okay? And so you have to remember that we're not necessarily focusing on content anymore once we get to this level. We're focusing on the how and the how of your thought process. So the only way to increase our metacognition is to practice and develop new skills, which is why therapy is so valuable for a lot of you. We end up a lot of you are so damn smart that you have such an analytical brain that you end up in this never-ending loop of thoughts all the time. And you think that you're to the end of the track, and then it starts all over again, okay? And I have that happen even when I'm in session with some of you, that we'll start with one thought, we'll work toward resolution, it gets derailed, and then we end up looping back around again, because you're so analytical, you're almost tripping over your own feet, if that makes sense. So think of therapy as that TwoMan IED team. A bomb is a bomb, symptoms are symptoms, trauma is trauma, and what we are now focusing on is the process of disarming the IED. We are learning about your thought process, we are figuring out the how behind it, we're figuring out how you learn, strengths and weaknesses, and what we can do to make those symptoms better, and basically disarm symptoms on pretty much a daily basis. You will become better with this over time, but it takes a lot of practice. So I hope that helps. Thank you for such a great question. Please submit more questions. I never know what will be helpful to you. So put something in the comments, or you can email me at the address listed below. And hope you all have a very happy new year. Take care. Bye-bye.